Hi guys, this is Erica from Gokce Capital.
Now before I begin, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on notifications. When Norm Hepner bought his new house, nobody told him it was on contaminated land. But Norm knew, because Norm is an environmental engineer. His job is to clean up contaminated sites. And he knew that the pristine new development he bought in central Washington had a long history of chemical exposure. Norm was buying land in a beautiful new subdivision built on a former orchard. And in the early 1900s, this orchard, along with thousands of others across the United States, was attacked by one very pernicious insect, the codling moth. The larva of this moth would burrow insidiously into apples, leaving nothing but a mushy core. As apple growers watched bushel upon bushel of harvested fruit come up mealy and black, they turned to the era's most potent pesticide, lead arsenate, and they sprayed this compound copiously on their trees day after day, decade after decade. The residue from all of this spraying settled in the ground, where it remains today as trace amounts of lead and arsenic. And now, new subdivisions are being built on top of this soil. But buyers in these new developments, like Norm, are not made aware of the potential hazard. How could this happen? I'll let you know later. But Norm's story is not unique. I've heard similar stories of arsenic-contaminated well water in states as far from Norm as North Carolina, which is why it is a good idea to do your own environmental analysis when buying land. And the first step is a Phase 1 environmental site assessment. So in today's video, I'll cover everything you should know about this process. Number 1, the Phase 1 ESA, or Environmental Site Assessment, is the first step in the environmental due diligence process. It results in a report that outlines the current and historical uses of the property and identifies any potential recognized environmental conditions. Number 2, the Phase 1 ESA has 4 main components. The environmental consultant will do a records review to check for any historical uses that may contribute to contamination on the soil. This includes looking at old building permits and planning documents and historical maps such as Sanborn, fire insurance maps, and topographic maps. The consultant will then conduct a site visit to check for any visual signs of contamination. The consultant will also conduct interviews of residents and previous owners to see whether anyone has memory of potential uses in and around the site that could contribute to contamination. And finally, the Phase 1 report is completed, which details the findings and recommendations. Number 3, the Phase 1 will then consolidate all of the research on historical uses in and around the site and determine whether any recognized environmental conditions are present. In other words, the report determines whether there is a high likelihood that the site may be contaminated. If RECs are likely to be present, a Phase 2 environmental site assessment will be recommended. And this is the phase where subsurface soil and water testing is done to determine whether contamination is present. Number 4, the Phase 1 ESA is useful not only for due diligence purposes, but also because it can protect you as a new landowner from environmental liability. This is because under the CERCLA Act, landowners are responsible for the cleanup of any contamination on their site, even if they were not the ones who contaminated the property. There is an exception, however, for innocent landowners. And to prove that you are an innocent landowner, you must show that you purchased the site after it was contaminated, that when you purchased the site you were unaware that it was contaminated, and that you performed all appropriate inquiries prior to purchase. You must show that you made an effort to determine whether the property was contaminated, and a Phase 1 ESA, when done properly, will count toward this requirement. Number 5. A Phase 1 ESA has a lot of benefits, but it does come with a cost. And this is why many land purchasers choose to forego a Phase 1 unless they already have a real concern about potential contamination. The cost range for a Phase 1 is between $1,500 and $6,000 on average. It's also important to note that a Phase 1 doesn't last forever. Typically, you only have 180 days before you will need to update the Phase 1 ESA, and a Phase 1 will have to be completely redone after 365 days. So if the closing drags on, you will have to spend extra in order to get the Phase 1 updated. Now, a Phase 1 is not generally required, so any land purchaser has to do a cost-benefit analysis. I will note, however, that if you are purchasing commercial land, you will likely be required to have a Phase 1 done by your lender. Number 6. If you do elect to have a Phase 1 commissioned before purchasing a property, make sure you hire a licensed professional. Usually this means hiring a licensed engineer or geologist who has experience specifically with AAI and ASTM standards for performing a Phase 1. But let's return to Norm, our home purchaser. How was he not given a disclosure when he bought his property? Well, a disclosure is only required if the seller knows of hazardous contamination. In the case of this particular development, the original developer did indeed have both a Phase 1 and Phase 2 environmental site assessment completed. As part of this analysis, 6 soil samples were taken. Now, it's important to note that the original 44 acres that the developer purchased contained both the old orchard and land that had never been sprayed with pesticides. 2 of the samples were taken from the old orchard. The other 4 were taken from areas that saw limited pesticide use. The result was that the average level of contamination across the whole area was listed as below the cleanup threshold, and the environmental investigator recommended that no further action be taken. Thus, relying upon this expert's report, the developer was able to say that there was no environmental contamination. Unfortunately, this case is an example that shows you cannot always rely on large-scale environmental site assessments that are done as part of the development process, and a clear case for why you should do your own environmental due diligence when you purchase land or even a home. And for more information on this particular case, you can check out the PBS news story. Now, do you have any stories about environmental contamination? Let us know in the comments. Did you like this video? You're going to love our Gokce Land Due Diligence program. We'll make you a land due diligence expert in just 7 days. Check it out at gokcecapital.com/glad. And while you're at our website, don't forget to explore our $1 down properties at gokcecapital.com/listings. Finally, don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. You can email, call, or text, and we will respond as soon as possible. So thank you for listening, and more to come.